The airplane cabin was buzzing with the usual chatter of boarding passengers, but my heart was calm as I settled into my well-earned first-class seat. For once, after months of service, deployments, and sleepless nights, I was about to enjoy a quiet flight home in comfort. That's when she appeared, an entitled woman with a sharp glare, dragging an overstuffed purse and radiating an energy that could silence laughter. She stopped right in front of me, lips curling as she glanced from my uniform jacket folded neatly on my lap to the empty seat beside me. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the passengers around us to hear. "These seats are for people who actually pay for them. Move to coach where you belong." Gasps rippled around us. I didn't even have the chance to respond before she began demanding that a flight attendant fix this mistake immediately. My chest tightened, not because I doubted my right to be there, but because of the venom dripping from her voice. I had earned this seat. Every mile, every sacrifice, every day spent away from my family was etched into that ticket. The flight attendant tried to calm her, but she wouldn't stop. She accused me of pretending to be important and even reached for my ticket to snatch it away. My patience was wearing thin, yet I sat silent, gripping the armrest. Then came the announcement over the intercom. The captain's voice echoed proudly, recognizing military passengers on board and thanking us for our service. Every head turned toward me. Suddenly the woman's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of shame. The crowd's reaction, applause, nods, and words of gratitude. In that moment, the power shifted entirely. She was exposed. The airport was alive with the usual symphony of rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, and the constant murmur of travelers hurrying from one gate to another. Sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, warming the polished floor tiles and casting long streaks of light across the bustling terminal. My boots tapped steadily as I walked toward my gate, each step a reminder of how long I'd been away from home and how close I finally was to getting there. The uniform jacket folded neatly over my arm carried with it more than just cloth. It carried months of duty, memories of sleepless nights, and the weight of everything I had endured. It wasn't my first flight, nor was it my first time traveling in uniform, but this one felt different. This wasn't a deployment. This wasn't a mission. This was me going home. Just the thought of it was enough to relax my shoulders, even as I maneuvered through the crowd. I had been blessed with an upgrade to first class, something rare for me, and for once I was looking forward to sitting comfortably instead of squeezing into a cramped seat. It felt like a small victory, a silent thank you from the universe after months of sacrifice. When I reached the gate, the attendant scanned my ticket with a polite smile. "You're all set. First-class boarding," she said softly. There was no fanfare, no announcement, just a brief acknowledgement that carried more weight than she knew. I nodded and made my way down the jet bridge, my heart light. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the clean, recycled breeze that poured from the airplane's open door. Inside, the cabin was calm and quiet. The leather seats gleamed under the soft daylight pouring through the oval windows. Flight attendants moved briskly, adjusting headrests and offering warm smiles. I found my seat second row, a seat wide enough that my legs wouldn't feel like they were locked in a cage for hours. I placed my bag in the overhead compartment, slid into the seat, and let out a breath that seemed to carry weeks of exhaustion with it. The leather was cool at first, but it softened quickly under my weight. I folded my uniform jacket carefully and laid it across my lap. For a moment, I closed my eyes, allowing myself to simply exist in silence. The hum of the engines outside, the occasional squeak of a rolling suitcase as other passengers boarded it, all blended into a rhythm that soothed me. For once there was no radio chatter, no drills, no weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Just me, in a quiet seat, waiting to go home. The peace lasted only a few minutes. A sharp click of heels echoed down the aisle, faster and louder than the shuffle of the other passengers. My eyes opened just as a woman in her mid-40s appeared in front of my row. She had an air of entitlement about her, the kind that drew attention without her even trying. Her blonde hair was styled immaculately, her sunglasses perched atop her head though the cabin was bright with daylight. She clutched a designer handbag that looked like it weighed more than her suitcase, and her eyes, narrow and assessing, landed on me as if I were a stain on her perfect view. Her lips curled the moment she saw the jacket folded on my lap. She tilted her chin, scanning my seat number, then snapping her gaze back to me. "You're in my seat," she declared, her tone sharp enough to slice through the calm. I blinked, startled not by her words but by the certainty in her voice. "I don't think so," I replied evenly, lifting the ticket stub from the armrest and showing her the number. 2A, this is my seat." She barely glanced at it before waving her hand dismissively. "That can't be right. These seats are for people who actually pay for them, not whatever this is." She gestured toward me in my uniform with a look that could only be described as disdain. A few heads turned from nearby seats. Passengers paused mid-conversation, eyes flicking between us. I felt the weight of their attention, but I stayed calm. Years of discipline had taught me patience, even in the face of arrogance. "Ma'am, I assure you, this is my seat. If you'd like, we can have the flight attendant check again." She scoffed, her voice rising. "I don't need to check anything. You're clearly pretending. People like you should sit in the back with everyone else." First class isn't for chauffeurs in costumes. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed them, but because of the sheer cruelty behind them. A costume. She had no idea what this jacket represented the nights under foreign skies. The friends I had lost, the sacrifices made without complaint. I gripped the armrest, reminding myself not to react in anger. The aisle grew quieter as more passengers noticed the commotion. A man across the row frowned, shaking his head, while a young woman in the seat behind me whispered something to her companion. The woman in front of me, however, only grew bolder, fueled by the attention. "Flight attendant," she barked, snapping her fingers in the air. "This man is in my seat. Fix this mistake immediately." A flight attendant hurried over, her expression polite but strained. She took both our tickets, checking carefully. "Ma'am, your seat is 18C, in economy," she explained gently. "This seat belongs to him." The woman's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That's ridiculous. There's no way someone like him is sitting up here while I'm stuck in the back. Move him, I'll take this seat." My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. The flight attendant repeated herself, this time firmer, reminding the woman of her assigned place. Passengers around us shifted, their discomfort turning into quiet murmurs. The sunlight streaming through the window caught her face, highlighting the red flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. Though she masked it with defiance, I sat still, jacket on my lap, watching the storm unfold. I wasn't going to surrender the seat I had earned. Not today. Not after everything I had given to get to this moment. The woman, however, showed no sign of backing down, and though the flight attendant tried to ease her away, I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't over. The cabin seemed to shrink around me as the woman planted herself firmly in the aisle, her handbag dangling from her arm like a weapon. Passengers squeezed past her, muttering as they tried to reach their seats, but she didn't move. She stood there, glaring down at me as if her sheer willpower would make me vanish. The flight attendant was still by her side, patient but firm, holding both tickets in her hands. "Ma'am," the attendant repeated, her voice steady despite the strain in her smile. "Your seat is 18C. This one is already assigned. If you'll follow me, I'll show you where it is." The woman folded her arms tightly across her chest. "Absolutely not. I was promised first class. I will not sit in economy like some nobody." She cast a deliberate glance toward me, her words aimed like arrows. Her voice was loud enough now that passengers several rows back had turned to watch. I leaned back in my seat, keeping my expression calm though my patience was thinning. Years of discipline had taught me to bite my tongue in moments like these, but inside I could feel my chest tighten. It wasn't just about a seat, it was the way she dismissed me, as if I hadn't earned the right to be here. The flight attendant took a slow breath, her hands clasping the tickets firmly. "Ma'am, if you don't take your assigned seat, we can't continue boarding. You're holding up the line." Passengers shuffled awkwardly behind her, clutching their bags, clearly irritated. A few whispered complaints drifted through the air. One man in a business suit finally sighed and said, "Just sit down already. You're blocking everyone." Her head snapped toward him. "Mind your business," she snapped, her cheeks flushed. "This is between me and the airline." And him. She jabbed a finger in my direction, her nails gleaming under the cabin lights. I shifted slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time since she began her tirade. "Ma'am," I said calmly, though my voice was firm, "I have the ticket for this seat. I'm not moving." For a moment, silence hung between us. Her eyes narrowed, as if trying to decide whether I was bluffing. Then her lips twisted into a smirk. "You think you're so special, don't you? Sitting here in your little costume, pretending you're important. People like you don't deserve seats like this. First class is for those who can afford it." Her words struck something deep inside me, though I didn't let it show. She had no idea what those stripes on my sleeve meant, or what it had cost me to earn them. She didn't see the months spent overseas, the endless hours on missions, or the quiet nights staring at a photo of home I couldn't return to. To her, it was just a uniform. To me, it was a life. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward in their seats to watch. The woman seemed fueled by the attention, her voice growing sharper. "I should be the one sitting here, not him. I pay taxes. I work hard. I deserve this more than some soldier trying to play hero." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Someone gasped. A young mother covering her child's ears muttered something about respect. The businessman from earlier shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable." The flight attendant's patience was clearly wearing thin. She crouched slightly, lowering her voice, though the entire row could still hear. "Ma'am, I need you to move to your assigned seat immediately. If you continue to argue, we may have to involve the captain." That word captain made her falter for the briefest moment. Her posture stiffened, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Fine, get him. Maybe then we'll sort this out properly." She raised her voice again, throwing her arms dramatically. "This is discrimination. I paid for my ticket just like anyone else, and now I'm being shoved to the back while this man takes my seat." I sat still, breathing slowly, my hand resting on the folded jacket in my lap. It would have been easy to lash out, to tell her off, but I knew better. Years of keeping my composure in tougher situations than this had taught me restraint. Still, it was hard to sit there while she spat venom like that. Passengers behind her grew restless, stepping around her to reach their seats. One woman muttered, "She's out of control," while another quietly whispered, "Don't let her get to you," as she passed me. Their support was quiet, but I felt it. The attendant tried again, her tone firmer now. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. If you don't take your assigned seat, we will not be able to depart, and security will be called." The woman's eyes darted between me, the flight attendant, and the passengers who were now openly staring. I could see the flush in her cheeks, the way her jaw tightened. Yet still, she clung to her pride like armor. "Call whoever you want. I'm not moving. He doesn't belong here. Everyone can see it." The tension in the cabin was heavy now, pressing down like a storm cloud. I could feel the frustration of the passengers, the strain in the flight attendant's posture, and the fire in the woman's glare. The sun streaming through the windows lit the scene in harsh brightness. No shadows to soften the edges. In that moment, I knew this wouldn't end quietly. The situation had gone too far for her to retreat gracefully. She was too invested in her performance, too unwilling to admit she was wrong. I sat still, my back straight, waiting for the next move. The attendant gave me a brief glance, her eyes apologetic, then turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, I'll inform the captain of the situation. Please wait here." She stepped away, leaving the woman standing there in the aisle, her arms crossed and her chest heaving with indignation. The murmurs of the passengers filled the air again, some annoyed, some amused, many shaking their heads. The businessman leaned over to me and muttered, "Don't worry about her. We know who's in the right here." I nodded silently, grateful for the support, but, deep inside, a knot of tension coiled tighter. This wasn't just a matter of being right or wrong anymore, it was a matter of respect, and I knew the next few minutes would decide how the rest of this flight would unfold. The woman stood tall, her chin lifted high, a defiant queen in her own mind. She didn't realize it yet, but her kingdom was crumbling around her, and as the flight attendant disappeared toward the cockpit, I knew the captain's word would soon decide the outcome of this standoff. The hum of the aircraft's air system seemed louder in the silence that followed the flight attendant's departure. Passengers who had once been preoccupied with their phones, conversations, or seat adjustments were now fully invested in the unfolding drama. Every eye in the first few rows and many beyond remained fixed on the woman standing stubbornly in the aisle. Her arms were crossed tightly, her expression set in stone, though a faint twitch at the corner of her mouth betrayed her nerves. She was still glaring at me as if her sheer disapproval could eject me from the seat. I kept my posture straight, my hands resting calmly on my lap, jacket folded neatly in place. The minutes stretched, long and uncomfortable. The low chatter among passengers rose and fell like the murmur of a restless tide. Some shook their heads, others whispered in hushed tones. The businessman across from me scrolled absently on his phone, though his eyes flicked up every few seconds to keep track of the standoff. Finally, the sound of firm footsteps echoed down the aisle. The flight attendant returned, her professional smile gone, replaced by a look of quiet authority. Behind her came the captain, his crisp uniform impeccable, his posture commanding. His presence changed the atmosphere immediately. Conversations died away, and even the woman seemed to falter as he approached. "Good morning," the captain said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the cabin. "I've been informed there's an issue with seating arrangements." His eyes moved first to the flight attendant, then to the woman, and finally to me. He didn't raise his voice, but his authority filled every corner of the space. The woman straightened as if bolstered by his arrival. "Yes, Captain," she said quickly, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. "There's been a mistake. This man is in my seat. I paid for first class, and I demand that it be corrected immediately." The captain's expression remained unreadable. He extended a hand, and the flight attendant placed both tickets in his palm. He examined them carefully, his brow furrowing slightly. Then he looked directly at the woman. "Ma'am, your ticket clearly states seat 18C. That is located in economy. This seat 2A belongs to him." A ripple of approval ran through the passengers. I could see some of them exchanging satisfied glances, while others smiled faintly. The woman's face, however, stiffened with outrage. "That can't be right," she burst out, her voice rising again. "I was promised a seat up here. I'm not going to sit in the back like some second-class citizen while he—" She waved a hand dismissively in my direction. "Pretends to be someone important." The captain's eyes hardened. His voice dropped slightly, but the steel in his tone was unmistakable. "Ma'am, there has been no mistake. Your assigned seat is in economy. If you refuse to sit in it, we will not be able to depart, and I will have no choice but to remove you from the aircraft. Do you understand?" Her mouth opened and closed, as if she couldn't quite process the reality of her situation. Passengers were no longer whispering. Many were openly watching, their faces a mix of frustration and quiet satisfaction. The businessman across the aisle muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, "About time." For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker in her eyes. But pride was a stubborn companion, and she clung to it like a lifeline. "This isn't fair," she muttered, her voice trembling with anger. "Why should he get special treatment? He's nothing more than— She stopped abruptly when the captain raised a hand. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm but filled with finality. "Ma'am, this man is a member of our military. He is not receiving special treatment. He has a valid ticket, just like you do. This seat belongs to him." That is the end of the discussion. The word military seemed to hang in the air like a spark. The woman's eyes widened slightly, her bravado slipping. A hush fell over the cabin as passengers absorbed the captain's words. Then, without warning, the overhead speaker crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice, now amplified for all to hear. "Before we depart today, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the military personnel traveling with us. We thank you for your service and your sacrifice. It is because of men and women like you that we enjoy the freedoms we often take for granted. On behalf of the crew, and I'm sure our passengers as well, we are honored to have you on board." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, it began, first with a single clap, then another, until the entire cabin was filled with the sound of applause. Passengers turned toward me, some smiling warmly, others nodding with respect. The businessman clapped the loudest, leaning forward slightly with a firm nod in my direction. A young woman across the aisle mouthed the words, "Thank you." Heat rose in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the unexpected swell of gratitude. I sat a little taller, my hand resting on the jacket in my lap, acknowledging the passengers with a small nod. The applause continued for several moments, a wave of appreciation that seemed to wash away the tension that had filled the cabin only minutes before. And then I looked at her. The woman's face had gone pale, her earlier fire extinguished in an instant. Her arms, once tightly crossed, now hung loosely at her sides. Her eyes darted nervously from the clapping passengers to the captain, then finally to me. The smug confidence she had worn like armor had shattered completely. She stood frozen in the aisle, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. The applause faded into quiet murmurs, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. Where there had been tension, now there was unity. The passengers, once irritated by the delay, now shared a collective sense of pride and solidarity. The woman, however, was left standing exposed, her arrogance laid bare for everyone to see. The captain handed the tickets back to the flight attendant. "Ma'am," he said quietly, though his voice carried, "you will take your assigned seat now, or you will not fly with us today. The choice is yours." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with a stiff nod and averted eyes, she turned sharply on her heel. Without another word, she marched down the aisle, her footsteps heavy and hurried. She disappeared into the rows of economy, her once proud figure now diminished. A sigh of relief spread through the cabin. The businessman across the aisle leaned toward me with a grin. "Well," he said softly, "I'd say you handled that better than anyone else could have." I smiled faintly, though my heart was still steady with adrenaline. "I've dealt with worse," I replied quietly. The flight attendant gave me a respectful nod before moving on to finish the boarding process. Slowly, passengers settled back into their routines, though many still cast me warm glances or whispered quiet thanks as they passed by. The sky outside was bright and cloudless, the sunlight pouring through the windows like a blessing. As the engines roared to life and the plane prepared for departure, I leaned back in my seat, finally allowing myself to exhale. The battle was over. Respect had prevailed. And somewhere in the back of the plane, a woman was sitting silently, perhaps realizing that entitlement could never outweigh honor. The engines hummed steadily as the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. The earlier tension still lingered faintly in the air, like the echo of a storm that had passed but left its traces behind. Yet the mood in the first-class cabin was lighter now, calmer and even a little proud. The applause had faded, but its memory remained, woven into the expressions of the passengers who occasionally glanced at me with quiet respect. I settled deeper into my seat, adjusting the uniform jacket across my lap. The leather no longer felt cold. It felt earned, like a throne carved out of discipline and sacrifice. I hadn't asked for recognition, but the moment had reminded me why I wore the uniform in the first place. It wasn't about MIT, it was about something larger, something that deserved respect whether people understood it or not. The businessman across the aisle leaned over slightly. His voice was quieter now, but his tone carried sincerity. "I just want to say, thank you. I travel a lot for work, and I don't often think about who makes it possible for me to do that safely. Today, I was reminded." I nodded, offering a small smile. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I just try to do my part." He chuckled softly. "Well, your part seems bigger than most of ours. I'm glad you're sitting up here." The young woman seated behind me leaned forward as well. Her hair was tucked neatly behind her ears, and she wore a soft smile. "My brother's in the Navy," she said quietly. "Seeing how that woman spoke to you, it made me angry. But watching how you stayed calm, that was inspiring." Her words warmed me more than I expected. I turned slightly, offering her a respectful nod. "Your brother's service matters just as much. It's not easy, but we do it because we believe in it." She smiled wider, then sat back, her expression thoughtful. For a few moments, the cabin returned to its quiet rhythm. Passengers adjusted seatbelts, stowed phones, and prepared for takeoff. But there was a subtle undercurrent of unity now. as if the confrontation had bonded strangers who would otherwise never have spoken. As the plane lifted off, sunlight streamed brightly through the windows, painting the cabin in gold. The city below shrank quickly, its buildings becoming tiny blocks, its roads mere lines stretching into the horizon. I watched the view, my mind both peaceful and restless. Part of me was grateful for the calm. Another part couldn't help but replay the woman's words. Her voice, sharp, dismissive, still echoed faintly in my head. Pretending to be someone important. She hadn't just questioned my right to sit in a seat, she'd questioned my worth, my identity. And though she had been silenced, though the applause had drowned her out, a small part of me still felt the sting. But then I thought of the passengers, the clapping, the nods, the whispers of thanks. I thought of the young woman and her brother, of the businessman's sincerity. The sting faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. For every entitled voice, there were a dozen more who understood, who respected. That was enough. The flight attendant soon returned with warm towels and drinks for the first-class cabin. She paused briefly by my seat, her professional composure softened by a small smile. On behalf of the crew, she said quietly, "Thank you, and I'm sorry for what happened earlier. You shouldn't have had to go through that." I shook my head. "Not your fault. You handled it well." Her smile deepened, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, before she moved on to the other passengers. As service continued, I noticed a subtle shift in how people behaved around me. Where once there might have been polite indifference, now there was warmth. A man across the row raised his glass slightly in a silent toast. A mother walking past with her child whispered, "That's him," as her little boy peeked curiously over the seat. Small gestures, but they carried weight. Meanwhile, the woman, the cause of it all, was nowhere in sight. She had vanished into the economy section, swallowed by the rows of seats farther back. But I imagined her sitting stiffly, arms folded, the sting of humiliation burning hotter than any apology could soothe. Perhaps she was still fuming, replaying her own words, searching for a way to frame herself as the victim. Or perhaps, just perhaps, she was realizing the truth. Entitlement had no place here. Not when measured against honor. The flight stretched on peacefully. Trays of food were served, the quiet clink of cutlery filling the cabin. I ate slowly, my thoughts drifting. Every so often I caught passengers' sneaking glances, their expressions softened with gratitude. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The silence between us was filled with respect. After the meal, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, though daylight still streamed bright and strong through the windows. I leaned back, resting my head, my thoughts straying to home. I pictured my family smiles, waiting at the terminal, arms ready to wrap me in the warmth I had missed for months. That thought steadied me more than anything else. The businessman broke the quiet again, his voice low but sincere. "You know, she'll remember this for the rest of her life. Being put in her place like that, it'll stick. And maybe, just maybe, she'll think twice before speaking like that again." I considered his words carefully. Maybe he was right, or maybe people like her never truly changed. But whether she did or not didn't matter to me. What mattered was how I carried myself, how I represented the uniform on my lap. The rest of the flight passed without incident. Conversations bubbled softly, laughter occasionally drifted through the air, and the earlier storm felt like nothing more than a distant memory. Yet, beneath it all, the respect I had felt from strangers lingered like a quiet flame. When the pilot's voice eventually announced that we would soon begin our descent, passengers stirred, stretching and preparing for landing. I folded my jacket carefully, tucking it into my bag, ready to step back into the world beyond the cabin. But as I glanced around, I realized something. This flight wasn't just about going home. It had become a reminder that respect wasn't demanded, was earned, not just through service but through patience, composure, and refusing to let arrogance win. Outside the window, the ground grew closer, green fields and winding roads, spreading out beneath the bright sky. The landing gear thudded softly as it descended. The cabin buzzed with anticipation, but I sat still, calm and collected. Somewhere behind me, the woman remained silent. Perhaps she was stewing in bitterness. Perhaps she was replaying the humiliation. But up here, in the front of the plane, the air felt lighter, clearer. I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't just defended my seat. I had defended my dignity. The plane descended smoothly, the bright daylight streaming through the windows painting the cabin in soft gold. Passengers sat upright, fastening seatbelts as the familiar chime echoed overhead. The engines roared with controlled power as we cut through a layer of thin clouds, the world below growing larger with every passing second. After hours in the air, the journey was nearly over. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as the wheels touched down with a jolt, rubber screeching faintly against the runway. The aircraft slowed, the rumble beneath us fading into a gentle roll as the pilot guided us toward the terminal. Around me, passengers stretched, adjusted bags, and prepared to return to their lives. But in the back of my mind, I knew this flight was one I would never forget. As we taxied toward the gate, a young boy across the aisle leaned over the armrest, his wide eyes fixed on me. His mother tugged him gently back, but he whispered loudly, "Mom, he's a soldier." The word carried through the quiet cabin, drawing a few smiles and soft laughter. The mother gave me an apologetic glance, but I simply smiled at the boy and offered a small nod. His grin widened as though he'd just met a superhero. The businessman who had spoken earlier leaned across the aisle once more. "You know," he said quietly, "people like her try to bring others down because they're empty inside. You didn't just show her up today, you reminded all of us that dignity wins louder than entitlement ever could." His words sank deep, and I nodded in agreement. "It wasn't about proving her wrong," I said softly. "It was about standing firm. Sometimes silence and patience speak louder than shouting ever will." The seatbelt sign clicked off, and the cabin filled with the usual flurry of movement. Passengers stood, gathering bags from the overhead bins. The woman, the source of so much chaos earlier, remained seated in economy, her head turned away as others moved past. I caught a brief glimpse of her when I stood to retrieve my bag. Her face was tight, her lips pressed together, but she didn't speak. Not a word that struck me then. For all her shouting and posturing, she had been reduced to silence. Not by me, not even by the captain, but by the truth that had unfolded so clearly in front of everyone. Entitlement had no place in the light of respect. The line of passengers shuffled forward. A few paused as they passed my small gestures that meant the world. One woman placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, whispering, "Thank you for your service." A man in a faded baseball cap simply gave me a firm nod, the quiet respect in his eyes saying more than words ever could. Even the young boy from earlier tugged on his mother's hand, pointing at me as if he'd just seen his hero step out of a storybook. When it was my turn, I stepped off the plane and into the bright terminal. The air was warmer here, filled with the scent of coffee and the sound of travelers hurrying toward their next destinations. I walked steadily, my bag over my shoulder, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The applause, the respect, even the confrontation, all of it reminded me of something simple but powerful. Honor is never given freely, it is earned. Behind me I could hear the entitled woman trailing with the rest of economy passengers. She moved quickly, her head low, her heels clicking on the polished floor. For a moment I wondered if she might approach me, perhaps even mutter an apology. But she didn't. She swept past, her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge me at all. And that was fine. I didn't need her apology. I had already received something greater, the respect of everyone else on that plane. Outside, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the terminal, casting the crowds in a warm glow. Families reunited in hugs, business travelers hurried to their connections, and children laughed as they ran ahead of their parents. I paused, soaking it all in, the noise, the light, the simple joy of being home. The world was moving forward, and so was I. As I walked toward the baggage claim, I reflected on the day. One woman's arrogance had tried to overshadow what I stood for, but the truth had shone brighter. Not because I fought back with anger, but because I stood firm with patience and dignity. That, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Life is full of people like her, out, entitled, convinced the world owes them something. But life is also full of people who understand respect, who see beyond arrogance, and who choose gratitude over greed. On that flight, those people had spoken louder than she ever could, and their voices stayed with me long after the applause had ended. As I finally reached the carousel, the sight of my family waiting just beyond security brought a lump to my throat. Their smiles, their open arms, their voices calling my name, all of it washed away the last traces of tension. I stepped into their embrace, the weight of months apart falling from my shoulders in an instant. The memory of that woman lingered faintly, but it no longer stung. She had tried to take something from me, but in the end, she had only given me more. A reminder of what it meant to carry myself with honor, no matter the circumstance. And as I held my family close, I knew the story was over, not the story of a flight, but the story of letting arrogance test dignity. In that battle, dignity had won.